Good morning and welcome to our 121st episode of the Veritas Fact Finding Series. And today I'm joined by Scott Aitchison. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning.
In each episode of our fact finding series, we go on the ground to speak to industry professionals in an unscripted, candid, live video format to discover how we can make better investment decisions. In this series and in everything we do, we believe the facts empower investors and the better information leads to better investment decisions. If you're watching and you like what you hear, give us a like and follow us, of course, at www.veritascorp.com. By way of background, my name is Anthony Scilipoti, and I'm the president and CEO of Veritas, which is an independent equity research firm based in Toronto, Canada. And I'm proud to say this year we're going to be celebrating 24 years, 100% employee-owned and operated. Quick disclaimer, this broadcast is not to be taken as investment advice, and participants or employees of the Veritas group of companies may own securities discussed on this broadcast. While we love all our guests, and of course Scott in particular, this session may contain forward-looking statements, investment opinions, and comments that we do not agree with at all. Now, I'd like to give you a quick update on Scott, which is quite amazing. He was actually first elected to the Huntsville Town Council in 1994 at 14 years old, actually at 21. And he served for 3 terms. At the time, he was the youngest individual ever elected to the Huntsville Town Council and Muskoka District Council. He was elected again as district and town councilor in 2010 and it was deputy mayor for the next 4 years. And then in 2014, he was elected as mayor. He was elected as mayor and re-elected in 2018 also as mayor. And then he took a big step, and we're going to dig into that. He decided to go to federal politics, and he ran for the Parry Sound, Muskoka, and he won in 2019 as a member of the Conservative Party. He even tried his hand to become Conservative Party leader and didn't win, but carried on and is, of course, looking forward to the next election, which is taking place next year. In the meantime, he's had a number of different roles as critics, and currently he serves as the housing critic. So, Scott, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Anthony. I'm honored to be here.
Good. Well, it's exciting. Listen, I'd like, with all our guests, I'd like to provide some perspective to all those listening and to all those paying attention. This is live, so if you have questions, please type them into the chat, and I'll make sure that Scott addresses them at the convenient time and during our discussion. So, Scott, why don't you tell us about yourself? Why did you get into politics? Why do you do what you do? And why do you keep doing it?
Yeah, well, all great questions. I got into politics, as you mentioned already. I was fairly young, but I was just always really keenly interested in what was going on in my community. And I remember as a young fellow reading the local newspaper. It was the Forester newspaper, and I would always sort of see the same names come up in that newspaper about really good things that were going on in our community, whether it was a fundraising drive for the hospital or whatever it might be. And I just thought, those people are, they're shaping the community, and I would love to, be involved in that some way, somehow. And truth be known, when I won that first election in 1994, I wasn't planning to run, but a former mayor convinced me that I should run. He said, you got to get your name out there, Scott. Nobody really knows who you are. He said, you're not going to win the first time, but you got to run. You just got to get your name out there. Just do what you do well. Go knock on doors, talk to people. And then by the skin of my teeth, I won by about 30 votes. And it pretty quickly changed the trajectory of things for me, because I was a 21-year-old kid on Huntsville Town Council and the Muskoka Regional Council. And boy, did I ever get an education on what was going on in the communities of Muskoka and the needs that existed. And I tell you, I got very quickly addicted to, solving problems. They weren't, always the biggest problems, but I really enjoyed it. And of course, I don't think anybody's in politics with a certain amount of ego. I probably enjoyed being the center of attention a little bit, the youngest ever, and the bit of adulation. So, anyhow, I think all politicians have a bit of ego. So I really like the attention too, I suppose, when I was that young.
Great. And you also worked in sales at Coldwell Banker, Thompson Real Estate, and at Fowler Construction. So you do have some experience actually working in the field in real estate. So this will help our discussion. So why don't we dig right into it? A lot of hot button issues, and why don't we just start with lack of supply? It's what everyone's talking about. And here we are in a situation where the number of condos for sale today in Ontario, we're sitting at near a 6 months of inventory. And houses, single family houses, sitting at around 4 months. So we're at levels that we haven't seen in decades, and yet there's a lack of supply.
Yeah, and that lack of supply has been it's been an issue that's been brewing really for decades. I mean, it's become really acute now, and we see it everywhere. But um, I always describe housing as as not just a static thing. It's a continuum, and we move through the housing continuum, or we have different types of housing needs depending on what's going on in our lives. And so, obviously, you think about young people maybe moving out of their family home and getting their first apartment, and then eventually buying their first place, and then maybe starting a family and needing a bigger place, and then the family moves on, and then you maybe downsize from that home. But there's movement along the housing spectrum. Really, it was in the 70s where changes to tax law by the then Pierre Trudeau government to really disincentivize the construction of purpose-built rentals, and then an ambition at the federal level to get into the social housing business by building housing. Really, that's when rentals, the building of rentals in a big way, dropped off dramatically. But then, of course, budgets got tight, and one of the first things to get cut was the construction of social housing, because I guess it's the easiest thing to sort of kick down the road. We'll deal with that later. And so that the crisis we have today really started then. And then you add on top of that, you know, uh, all the different fees and charges of government. Using tools like zoning bylaws and these kinds of things, municipalities have made it tougher and tougher and tougher to get approval to build a home in whatever format. Um, you know, uh, the other issue too, of course, is that interest rates have been low for a long, long time, and the market has responded to that by building ever bigger homes. So oftentimes,
Mhm.
people who were getting their first home, it was quite a bit bigger than you would have gotten. The big crisis after the war, there were lots of homes built, and they were built fast, and we solved this problem. But they were a tiny home by the comparison of what we have today, and so you add up all these factors, and then the sort of massive jump in interest rates, and huge fluctuations in the supply chain, local regulations and difficulties and charges and fees at every level. And it's made this supply reach this crisis point that we're in today.
So how would if you were elected tomorrow, how would your party deal with it?
Well, broadly speaking, the solution to the housing situation in this country is a classically small C conservative solution. It's less government. It takes way too long to get the approvals to build a home in this country. And so, we need to, I have a lot of suggestions for how municipalities can improve the process for getting homes built. Um, but among them are things like, if municipalities did more planning ahead. All municipalities have what they call official plans or community development plans, and it sort of describes, what the community will look like. And then those ambitions of the municipality are enforced through what's called the zoning bylaw. And so, if municipalities did a lot more planning and said, instead of saying, we'd like to see more higher density development in certain areas, but actually identify those areas, and then automatically upzone those areas. We're thinking particularly around high density transit investments, that kind of thing, for example. If and through your planning process, you decided that that would be upzoned and ready to go, and it wouldn't have to go through a process every time somebody came along for a development application, you could speed up the process pretty dramatically. You wouldn't make it less democratic, because the public process of planning out your city is very public, but processing applications every single time adds costs and delays, and time is money. And so it just adds, and it's not like the developer just pays those bills. All the costs related to the development approvals process, whether it's, whether it's studies and analysis and all these kinds of things, they cost money because they're often carrying the land and that value. And then all those fees and charges and all those extra costs related to building the building, rebuilding the home, they just go to the bottom line, whether it's part of the cost of the rent of the space, or the sale of the unit, or the sale of the home. And so all those extra added costs and fees at the local level, have served to make housing a lot more expensive. In fact, the average across Canada, is about 33% of the cost of every single housing unit is government. Nobody makes more money on housing than governments.
And now that's dried up because you're seeing housing starts fall off a cliff. So that's going to hurt municipalities, and it's going to hurt all the way up the chain, right?
Yeah.
So how do you spur this, new development?
Well, there's a couple of good things that have happened. I don't give a lot of credit to the current government, but I won't be terribly partisan here. They made a couple of smart moves. One of which is removing the GST from the construction of purpose-built rentals. So this is a move back to, the system that existed in the early 70s that stimulated the construction of a lot of rentals, the MERB program and capital cost allowance. These were good programs that incentivize that investment. The CMHC reports that we need, something like 6 million more homes in the next 10 years in this country. And the average that we build over the last several years has been about 250,000 units a year. We'll never catch that number. And it also represents about $3 trillion of investment in housing. That's a staggering number that absolutely will not get met even close without private sector investment. And so it's right for government to incentivize that private sector investment and to attract that investment. And so that's one of the tools that has made some sense from this government. But the other thing we've got to do is we still have to attract that investment while making it easier to execute the construction as well. And so we need to simplify the process, and we need to get municipal governments on board with this as well, to speed up the process and simplify the process and make it cheaper. I'll get into this too.
Do that when now there's fewer transactions, so now they're not getting as much of the land transfer fee. Toronto's in serious trouble in terms of our finances, and they can't go into deficit because they can't borrow money. So they're going to be knocking on your door.
Yeah, and this is one of the issues too. One of the tools that the provincial government has come up with is something called development charges. I mean, it's used commonly across North America, and development charges are just flat out fees charged to new builds to help to basically pay for the cost of any expansion of infrastructure required for that new development. And so there's been this concept in the municipal world for decades now that growth will pay for growth. But the problem with that, of course, is that you're front-ending the cost of new infrastructure investments onto the new home. And while money was super, super cheap, it was bearable, and we made it work, and we did it. But you got to think, it's patently really difficult and unfair to make, someone in their late 20s trying to buy their first home, pay hundreds of extra thousands of dollars, putting it on their mortgage to pay for future increases or whatever to sewer pipes or widening to streets and that kind of stuff. You're making them pay before it's done. And it's making the cost of those units out of reach. And so it's not going to work anymore. If you're not building homes because it's too expensive and people can't afford them, you're not going to be collecting any development charges. So, municipalities are definitely short cash. I mean, the system is, they need infrastructure dollars. There's no question about that. And that's one of the reasons why, when as a party, when we talk about this issue, we talk about infrastructure dollars being given to municipalities, but it being tied to results. If they're speeding up the process, improving the timelines and making sure that more homes get built, then there'll be lots of infrastructure dollars from the federal government under a conservative government that would help them pay for those infrastructure costs without making it more expensive to get into the market.
It sounds like when I read some of your notes that you've posted on your website about some of your ideas, that you want to make the municipalities more accountable, in the sense where if they don't reach certain thresholds, they won't get certain amount of financing. Is this, maybe you can elaborate on some of that, because you've just touched on a little bit of it.
Yeah, and it's absolutely true. I mean, municipal governments, and trust me, I understand this very well. I chaired the planning
You've
committee for
worked on
many
both
years
sides.
in Muskoka. I was the mayor of Huntsville. And the scale of the situation in Huntsville, for example, is vastly different than it is in Toronto. But the planning tools and the principles are very much the same in both communities. And there are no shortage of local municipal officials and councillors elected, uh, who might even be presented in a meeting with a planning proposal that their staff and the professionals all have worked on, and present to the council that say, this makes sense, this is good planning, we need these units. But the neighborhood is opposed to it, and the council will vote against it. The NIMBY thing,
Yeah.
right? And so what we're saying is, that can't happen anymore. It's basically the people who have made it, who have a home, that are saying, we don't want any new homes here, and they're disadvantaging a whole generation of Canadians, and that's just not going to work anymore. And so what we're saying is, yes, we will hold municipalities accountable. One of the things that the current government has done federally that I just don't agree with is they've come up with something called the Housing Accelerator Fund. I'm sure many of your listeners have heard of this fund before. The problem with the Housing Accelerator Fund is they've given about $4 billion. Keep in mind, this is money that they've had to borrow because we're well into the deficit world. They've borrowed $4 billion, and they're giving it out to cities based on a series of criteria that we don't really know a lot about, because they won't show us the agreements. But one of the common themes is that the federal minister of housing is telling cities that you need to make fourplexes in any residential area a right. They don't have to go through a public process to do it. Like that's some kind of a silver bullet. It's $4 billion, but at the same time, these cities are getting money from the federal government through the Housing Accelerator Fund and raising their development charges. The city of Toronto is a great example. They got $471 million from this fund. They're getting it over a couple of years. And then they just increased their development charges by 20%. And so it's like having your foot on the gas and the brake at the same time. It doesn't work. And it's just more borrowed money that exacerbates the inflation situation. It adds debt to the national ledger, and it doesn't get more homes built. And so our argument is, enough of these, photo op events with money based on promises to be better at this. We will reward results, full stop. It'll be infrastructure dollars for results. And I'm convinced that is the tool that will hold municipal governments accountable.
You've mentioned again in some notes about what to do with federal governmental buildings and potential land, and how that could help the supply shortage and affordability. Maybe you could touch on that.
Yeah, there's the federal government owns like almost 40,000 buildings.
Okay.
It's a staggering number. Now, a huge number of them are in Ottawa, and a lot of them are sitting empty or half empty. And so what we're saying is that, right now there's a process that the federal bureaucracy goes through to declare federal office buildings or office space surplus. You can imagine the labyrinth that things have to go through before someone declares that they don't need a piece of real estate in this federal machine. But we need to expedite that process as well, make these buildings available. There's also huge swaths of land that the federal government owns all across the country that is close to cities, close to smaller cities that we could make available. Downsview Park is actually a reasonably good example of federal lands that are being turned into housing, but the process is so slow. It just takes so long. And it seems like there's no sense of urgency to these things. So we would demand that we actually make all kinds of buildings available, thousands of them, and frankly we would approach it a different way too. This is another issue that happens. I was in Burnaby, BC, I met with the mayor, and he was telling me about this post office that they really wanted to get from the post office. It was surrounded by brand new condo towers and development. The Sky train station was just a block away, and they really wanted to build on this and work with a developer to build it. They said they'd build them a brand new post office on the main level. And so the building was built in the 60s. It was listed as a condition of poor. But when they went to the post office, the response back was, "Oh, it's not surplus," and they refused to play ball. There's a concept in urban planning called highest and best use, and I
Yep.
guarantee you they did not look at that post office from the perspective, number one, of the highest and best use of that land. They also didn't think about it very intelligently in the context of a national, post corporation that's losing money. This would be a great way for them to get an asset off their books while getting a brand new space to operate their post office. It makes a lot of sense, but they don't get it.
So let's say we do that. We sell off or some portion of of those buildings get moved, and say I think you make a suggestion of 15% of these government buildings. How do they get built?
Well, and this is the other crucial issue, right? We
Because
need
this is I mean, we've all seen that you touched on social housing and the
yeah.
problems we've had with social housing. I don't know that we want to go down that route because there's parts of Toronto that you don't want to go, you don't want to go down because of what happened.
Yeah. Honestly, the best and most efficient and quickest way to get these units built is by activating private sector investment. We're going to need to use obviously very different tools to build. Uh,
Yep.
you know, back in the post-war era, all across North America, we built millions and millions of homes, and we did it using techniques like panelization. They were
Yep.
factory-built homes. That's not new technology. There are companies doing it today. But to really scale up that investment in panelization and modular construction, they have to be certain that there's a place for these units to go. And so, we've got to get a long runway of approved lots and spaces for these units to go. We need to increase the density around those urban transit nodes and do that by incentivizing the private sector to build, by reducing the timelines and the costs and the fees and making the tax structure right, so that you're attracting literally trillions of dollars of investment from around the world.
So who manages the building? So you get an outside developer to develop it,
Yeah.
but the government could continue to own it, because I'd like this to be it could be a PPP situation, right, where the government acts as continues to own the building or develops it, and the benefits go to the individuals that rent and their families, and the government continues to earn a return on that.
Yeah, I think there are certainly circumstances where it would be appropriate for some level of government to own buildings, particularly social and supportive housing, but not necessarily. I mean, I've been in government my whole life. I can tell you that it's just not an efficient operation at any scale, at any level. It's not designed to be efficient. It's designed to be democratic. And so, democracy
That was
is great, but it's not fast. And so, there are all kinds of organizations that run and operate social and supportive housing, affordable units. There are varying degrees of what is affordable in the market, and again, government doesn't need to own these buildings to make sure that we're delivering results. One of the reasons I always liked as a mayor to have a private sector builder build affordable units, and not the municipality build it, is not they got it done faster. We would maybe give land to the developer, waive some fees, but ultimately that building would be paying municipal property tax, which we needed.
right.
So if a level of government owns it, you're not collecting the tax, right? So private sector will get it built faster, more efficiently, better. Plus, they'll also contribute back to the municipal coffers that it needs that money. So there'll be some instances where government does own units. Absolutely, we need more social housing in this country as well. But the vast majority of what we need can absolutely and will absolutely be built by the private sector, with government incentivizing that investment and then getting out of their way.
let's touch on another couple of hot button issues here. And the next one I think we've got to talk about is immigration. We've had a record number of immigrants into this country. And I'm obviously, my family's an immigrant family, so this is not something I'm against necessarily, but just I think it's led to a situation where we've had more permanent residents come in than we've had jobs created over the last 2 years. Our unemployment rate is now sitting at 6.4, up from 5. And so maybe you can touch on how we're going to deal with this.
Yeah, listen, this is one of the huge issues compounding the situation in housing in this country. But it's worse than that. I mean, Canada has had an immigration system that, frankly, has been the envy of the world. It's been an amazing system that lots of other countries have tried to emulate. We use a point system. It's actually a really great system, and the current government, I don't know if they were just asleep at the switch or what happened, but various different programs, whether it's the temporary foreign worker program or the international student program, there have been no checks on any of this stuff, and as a result, literally, like quadruple the number of people that we could reasonably manage and absorb into our system have come into the country, and it's too much too fast. Canada absolutely needs to grow, and we need a robust immigration system to keep attracting people to this country. But if you do it too fast without any planning, not just for housing, but for education, for doctors, for all the services that Canadians need, uh, then you're putting a crippling burden on all of those services, not just for the people that are arriving here, but for the people who are already here. And so it's like there was no plan. They just kind of opened the floodgates. Uh, we need to rein that in. We need to get back to manageable numbers, and start tying some of those numbers to the reality on the ground on housing, some of these other issues. And so whether that's what that number is, I don't know exactly, but I know it's dramatically less than 1 million people a year.
Do we cut it back to zero?
I don't know. We might have to for a couple of years to get caught up, but this is the kind of thing that I mean, it's not complex math. We need to. Yeah, absolutely, right. So we need to have an honest look at that, at the whole process, and see what it will take for us to catch up to the people that are here, and then when we can start absorbing new Canadians and working them, getting them into our system and into our society and in a productive way.
And you touch on something else, because our productivity has not been good, right? And that's been going down because as GDP grows, but population grows quicker, you have productivity as a population or per capita declining, or even GDP per capita declining. So yeah, all of this compounds the issue to make a situation where our standard of living as a country declines. And so like these issues we're talking about have significant repercussions up the chain, if you will. So how do we make this work?
Well, listen, you'll be more of an expert on this than I am, Anthony, but it's clear to me that a lot of Canadians over the last several decades have instead of invested their money in the market or in industry, to grow and make Canada more competitive, and invest in new technology to make our industry better. A lot of Canadians have invested in the housing market and have bought rental units instead, right? And CMHC programs and government programs have encouraged that investment because of the need for more housing. But as a result, that I don't think that kind of an investment helps to make our economy more innovative or more productive. And so as a result, we need to get investment into housing, but we also need to make sure that we're attracting new investment into housing from around the world, but making sure that Canadians are investing in making this country more competitive and making our industry, more modern and using new technology too. So you understand that far better than I do, but I think they call it lazy investment, right? Like it's just sort of
it is
static
correct. It's
investments.
not productive.
Yeah.
Real estate's not productive. It's built, and once it sits there, it actually depreciates and ends up reducing productivity. Because if there's not another building to build, what does the bricklayer do, and what does the form fitter do, et cetera? They go, because they're not going to flip burgers.
Yeah.
So we got a problem. Even CMHC said that today there's actually more people working in the construction industry than there were during the 70s and 80s on a comparative ratio to number of units being built, which is interesting. And touching on your point that said that the productivity in construction has not really increased. In a lot of our building, the way we're doing it is sort of, I don't want to say archaic, but it hasn't evolved over time the way we have in many other technologies.
I heard it's a great point. I heard a really great description of that very situation. A fellow was describing, he said, now imagine in the 1950s, you cryogenically froze a bricklayer and a pilot for our plane. And then you thawed them and brought them in, and 30, 40 years, 50 years later, you say to the pilot, go fly that plane. They simply couldn't do it. But you say the same thing to the bricklayer, they'd be laying bricks in about 5 minutes, right? Like it hasn't changed. Technology has changed absolutely everything we do, except for the way we build homes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Just a reminder to anyone, if they have questions, to please put them into the chat, and I'll make sure that Scott addresses them. Scott, when you think about, I know that this is something you deal with as well in the First Nations that you have up in the Muskoka area and surrounding. How does that play into sort of the whole housing issue that we're faced with?
Well, this is an area, frankly, where the federal government has absolutely direct responsibility to work with First Nations, and of course the housing situation. I mean, it varies across all the. I think there's a little over 600 First Nations across this country, but the federal government using technologies like panelization and investments in First Nations housing, we could make a really huge difference. There are huge numbers of Indigenous Canadians who are underhoused in horrible housing conditions, but whether it's on reserve, and then of course I don't think people always realize that the majority of Indigenous persons in this country don't live on reserve. They live in urban centers, and the incidence of homelessness, the incidence of chronic addictions and mental health issues is much higher amongst that population because of the vulnerabilities. We, as a federal government, we have direct responsibility to support First Nations peoples, and this is an area where if we were working, with the leadership of First Nations across the country to help with housing, we would actually get more First Nations peoples housed, and then by doing that, we would help the municipalities around as well with more housing as well, because more people housed is more people housed. It's a similar issue with, for example, our Canadian Forces bases. If the federal government was fixing up and building more units for Canadian servicemen and women on base, you would have better housing. They would have better housing. Plus, the ones that are searching for units in the municipality wouldn't be doing that, and you'd be freeing up units for other folks in the municipality as well. So, it's a smart investment because you don't have to go buy new land. You don't have to do those kinds of things. You can just start building and get going right away. And these are the kinds of investments that take a huge chunk of the cost away, and your dollar goes a lot farther, and you can get a lot more people housed. So there's a couple of those areas where the federal government has very direct responsibility. We can make a huge difference.
I want to go back and sort of see if I can tie some of these points together and think about what a potential outcome is. So it's known where our largest asset as Canadians is our homes, and that being the case, those that have homes the outcome of making the homes more affordable is essentially a loss of wealth. And so while we talk that we want to make houses more affordable, that's true, but not my house. And so you have a situation where, where the haves and have nots, and you're seeing, London has had a number of riots. People don't have jobs. There's all kinds of things going on. There's people living in tents in parts of this country as well. There's extreme situations like we've seen out in Oakland and San Francisco of homelessness and what happens when there's this great divide, right? And so it almost seems to me like you almost need a reset. But reset means pain. And if you have that, like again, in a democratic system, does that party get reelected?
Yeah, listen, I think that there's a number of different factors here. One of which is the size of homes. Like I said earlier, so many of the homes that are being built in subdivisions today, they're
Yes.
dramatically bigger than probably a family really truly needs. And so if there's smaller product available in the market, that's going to be cheaper and more attainable for people. I also think that in cities particularly, we've got to increase densities where it makes sense to increase densities, on things like transit lines and that kind of stuff. And so, you see the evolution of cities occur where, the city of Toronto, for example, has, huge areas of single family detached homes. And over time, that gets in the density grows and the single detached family home, isn't in the core of the city anymore. These are the kind of things that have to occur for a city to evolve and to remain affordable for the people that work in all the different industries. I've heard an expression that if you're buying coffee at a coffee shop and the person serving the coffee can't live within an hour of that coffee shop, then it's not really a healthy city. And so we have to have people that can live and work in the community. That's going to mean higher density around urban transit nodes. But it's also going to mean quite a different variety of product in the detached housing market as well, so that people can get into a smaller house. And perhaps once you start doing those things too, the people in the bigger homes that are thinking of downsizing, well, they'll have a place to go and free up their home for somebody that's looking to move. This is the crux of it. We've got to have movement through the housing continuum for people to downsize from their bigger house as well as young people getting into their first home. And so more supply actually does free the market up a little bit more and people can move through.
And we did a study last year for our real estate conference, and this year our conference is going to be on October 3rd. And as we looked at the per square footage residential infrastructure here in this country versus globally, and we are incredibly inefficient. In some ways, you could argue that while we say we don't have enough supply, it's that we actually have enough square footage. It's just that each of us is living in more square feet than the average around the world. And that, again, is another disruption. And so the home of 3,500 square feet or 2,500 or 4,000 square feet where there's a family of 5, the next family is probably family unit of 3.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, or it's a friend of 3 friends living together, do they need that big of a home? So maybe that plan that's being proposed to be able to turn single family homes into fourplexes, maybe that's something that I don't see why you need funding for that, but
yeah, I mean, those kinds of ideas to help create density in smaller ways like that. I mean, they're great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not opposed to the right of a homeowner to turn their place into a fourplex. I'm just saying it's not a silver bullet. It's not the only thing. We've got to be doing that. We've got to be making sure there's smaller product on the market, a wider price range. I mean, you go into a new subdivision being built on the outskirts of the GTA, and the prices are pretty set, right? Like they're all the same house. And so we need more variety. We need smaller homes available. Um, and that's the only way we're going to introduce some semblance of balance back into the market.
Could we, when we bring in a new Canadian, could we say, "Yep, you can come in, but we need you to go somewhere outside of Timmins, and we actually need some work up in Huntsville, and you know what? We'd like you to move to North Bay." How does that? Is that possible?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think it's the kind of thing that's kind of happening already. If you look at the programs like the temporary foreign workers program, for example, there are lots of folks that have come to Canada through that program that are living not in the core of Toronto or in the GTA, but they're out in smaller communities. Timmins is an example of a municipality that's attracted a lot of international students to the city, and they're staying. And so it's just we need those smaller municipalities that recognize their need for growth. They want to grow. Um, we got to partner with them to make sure that we're helping them attract people to the community as well, and to help them grow.
But we need to give them some type of job that's going
Yeah,
to be long-standing.
yeah, absolutely.
So I'll address a question that was put up, suggesting that there's, essentially, Mark asked a question that there's two ways to deal with the immigration or the new Canadian issue. We either ask the owners of existing stock to take in the new Canadians. Historically, that could be done on an involuntary basis, or it could be done on a forced basis, like the British did to the colonies. Or what do we do? Do we say, listen, you can't, there's no more room for you? Like, does it get to that?
Well, I think that we are at a point where we have to put the brakes on, and catch up to the number of people that are here now. We have to put the brakes on the international student program, so we can catch up there, and we have to hold universities and colleges accountable here as well. It's immoral for a school to attract a student, and know full well there's no place for them to live when they get there.
Scott, it's actually a problem, and I mean, I have a child of university age, and that's happening. But the other thing is, what happens? So if they stop the foreign student, well, the size of the structures that have been built up in the universities and colleges over the last 5 years has been significant. Now you reduce the enrollment. What happens? We've already seen one of the universities, what was it, Laurentian University,
Yeah, in Sudbury. Yeah,
go bankrupt. Like, this is a reality.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. But this is another example, though, where these partnerships could work really well with university land, and favorable CMHC financing and a private sector builder. You could get a lot more dormitories and residents built on some of these university campuses. Um, and then you've got housing, and you've freed up housing in the community for other people as well. There are lots of great ways to make sure there's enough housing for students in this country, but we've got to get caught up. We've let it just run wild for too long, and now we're in the situation we're in. We've got to get caught up.
And do you agree there's going to be some pain here? Like, I don't want you. Could you give your perspective on what you think happens here in the housing market? We're obviously
Yeah.
holding, shut down a little bit, but there's very few transactions taking place. So
Yeah, the pain is now. I mean, it's happening now, right? Um, there's certainly a lot of pain in terms of people that want to try to get into the market. There's a lot of pain in terms of the number of new Canadians arriving here and not able to find a place. Um, they're in like the homeless shelter system, and intense. There is pain today. It exists right now, and the value of people's homes doesn't have to drop precipitously for us to get caught up on supply. Um, it will balance out, but it doesn't have to drop precipitously for us to get caught up. We need to make it cheaper and faster and easier to build. That will make the homes cheaper for people to get into, and we need to make, some smaller product as well. Just because somebody has a smaller place a couple of streets down from you doesn't mean your bigger place is all of a sudden not as
Worthless.
valuable, right? It's not worthless. Um, but you have a broader mix of housing styles and attainability in your community and in your market. And so there's a segment of the market that's missing, and it's the smaller, cheaper unit.
All right, let's keep at the good fight here. I want to leave you with a questions we always like to ask our guests here. Your favorite book that you'd like to recommend?
My favorite book is by John Irving, actually, one of my favorite authors. I don't read a lot of fiction, but A Prayer for Owen Meany is probably one of my favorite books of all time.
A favorite politician?
Brian Mulroney was a hero of mine, and I had the great honor of meeting him before he passed, and he was a remarkably encouraging to me, and particularly so during the leadership race. Actually, he reached out to me, and yeah, he was pretty inspiring. So.
That's nice to hear. I heard him speak once as well. Quite a gentleman, and he very well versed of what's going on in the world. And lastly, your favorite breakfast meal, and if you have a favorite breakfast restaurant for us up in Muskoka, then we can all go.
I'm a fairly traditional breakfast guy. I would probably wind up at the Family Place in Huntsville, which has been there forever. It's a great little spot, and probably have a nice, just a simple coffee with some bacon and eggs.
Very good. All right, Scott, thanks for your time today, and thanks for listening, and keep it up.
Thank you, Anthony.